10 True Lake House Horror Stories. Untold Fears. Intro. There's something unsettling about lake houses. They're often quiet, far from neighbors, and surrounded by thick forests where sound carries strangely across the water. For many, they're a place of peace and escape. But for others, they've been the setting of chilling nightmares that defy explanation. Tonight, we dive into 10 true lake house horror stories, accounts of isolation, paranormal encounters, and untold fears that linger long after the water stills. Story 1. The Face in the Water. A family rented a cabin on a remote lake in Minnesota for summer vacation. On the second night, the father stepped outside to smoke and looked out at the moonlit water. That's when he froze. Just below the surface was the pale, distorted face of a woman, staring directly at him. He thought it was a trick of the light, until the face rose higher, opening wide, glassy eyes. By the time he called his wife, the face sank beneath the water. The next morning, they found out a woman had drowned in that lake the previous summer. Her body never recovered. Story 2. The Knocking from the Dock. A young couple bought a cheap lake house in Michigan, hoping to fix it up. On their first night, they heard knocking outside, 3 heavy bangs, like someone hitting the wooden dock. The husband went out with a flashlight but found no one. The knocking returned at exactly 3 a.m. for 3 nights in a row, always on the dock. When they mentioned it to locals, one old fisherman shook his head and said, "That's where the boy was last seen before he drowned. He always comes back knocking." Story 3. The Window Watcher. In northern Ontario, a woman stayed alone in her family's cabin. Around midnight, she felt like someone was watching her. Pulling back the curtains, she was horrified to see a man's face pressed against the glass. She screamed, grabbed a flashlight, and ran outside, only to find the ground untouched. No footprints in the dirt, no broken grass. Just the faint impression of a face smeared into the glass. Story 4. The Screams Across the Water. A group of college friends spent a weekend at a lake house in Maine. Late one night, while drinking on the deck, they heard faint screaming echoing across the water. At first, they thought it was another group partying. But the screams grew louder, turning into frantic pleas for help. When they tried to locate the source by boat, the sound always seemed to come from just out of reach. Eventually, it stopped altogether. The next morning, they asked locals about it. The reply was chilling. "You heard them too. That's not the first time." Story 5. The Shadow in the Boathouse. A father and son were fishing near their boathouse when the boy pointed to the shadows inside. A tall figure stood silently in the corner, motionless. Thinking it was a trespasser, the father grabbed a hammer and stormed inside, only to find the space completely empty. But the smell lingered, damp, earthy, like rotting wood. That night, the boy woke up screaming, "The man from the boathouse is in my room." Story 6. The Cabin That Breathed. In upstate New York, 2 sisters rented a lakeside cabin. The first night, they noticed something strange. When the wind blew, the entire cabin seemed to breathe, the walls expanding slightly before returning. Thinking it was just settling wood, they ignored it. But on the second night, they woke to the sound of deep inhaling, and the walls moved in and out, in perfect rhythm, as if the house itself were alive and breathing with them. Story 7. The Thing Under the Dock. A teenager loved to swim under the dock of his family's summer house. One afternoon, he felt something brush against his leg. He thought it was weeds until a hand gripped his ankle and yanked him down. He fought and broke free, surfacing in a panic. His father dove in immediately but found nothing. No rocks, no debris, no body. The boy refused to swim again, convinced something lived under that dock, waiting for the next swimmer. Story 8. The Vanishing Lights. 2 hunters stayed at a lake cabin in the Ozarks. At night, they saw lantern lights across the water, slowly moving along the shoreline. Believing it was another group, they rowed over to say hello, but as they approached, the lights vanished completely. Returning to their cabin, they looked back and saw the lights again, glowing faintly where they had just been. When they mentioned it later, a ranger told them the story of a fishing party that drowned decades ago, their lanterns lost forever in the water. Story 9. The Thing in the Attic. A man inherited his grandfather's old lake house. The place smelled of mold and rot, and he kept hearing scurrying sounds above him at night. One evening, determined to end it, he opened the attic. What he found wasn't rodents, but a crude wooden idol, carved with a twisted face and surrounded by dead bird bones. That night, the noises stopped. But he began dreaming of a faceless thing crawling down from the attic to watch him as he slept. Story 10. The Final Guest. A family bought a beautiful lake house in Wisconsin. The real estate agent mentioned it had been on the market for years, since people kept changing their minds after moving in. On their last night before returning home, the parents were packing when their daughter asked, "Who was the man in my room last night?" "He said he lives here too." Thinking it was just imagination, they laughed it off, until they found muddy footprints leading from the water, across the porch, and straight into the little girl's bedroom. Outro. Lake houses promise calm waters and peaceful retreats, but behind those glassy surfaces lurk stories too chilling to ignore. When the water ripples at night, or you hear footsteps on the dock, remember these tales. Sometimes, the lake doesn't want you there. And sometimes, it wants you forever.